The United States has 3 million people and only 8 million travels internationally. That comes out to 2.67% compared to Europeans' 78% of traveling internationally. Why is Americans less likely to travel outside the United States borders compared to Europeans? I was pondering this question as I was traveling across the country from Hawaii to the East Coast. So I thought why we never traveled internationally. So my first step into answering this question was to go home and ask my mom.
My name is Deborah. I'm 61 years old and I'm from South Spring Valley, New York. No, they're more likely to travel today. Back in the 1970s, planes were not as safe. And there were a lot more plane crashes back in the 1970s. So more people are traveling abroad today than ever before. We're leaving the comfort of our country to go into an unknown country. Whereas when you're living over in Europe, you're just hopping from one country to the next, and that to us is like hopping from one state to the next. That's like me growing up in New York and leaving New York when I was 27 and moving to Florida and living half my life in Florida and then moving to Georgia. And that's how it's like over in Europe. Us hopping from one state to the next here in the United States, and they're going from one country to the next over in Europe. It's the same thing.
So I pulled out all of my childhood albums that I have that my parents don't have, and I only remember growing up like going to a few places internationally. It wasn't something we commonly did in my family. Like we just kind of traveled throughout the United States. Our first time going international is we took a cruise to the Bahamas. I want to say it was like 12 or 13 there. Like me, my brother, and my mom were super excited to go on a cruise ship for the first time and to leave the country, go to the Bahamas. So it was definitely fun as a teenager going on a cruise ship. I guess there are multiple reasons why Americans are less likely to travel internationally. I guess the first being the comfort we have in America. But what does this really mean? Is this comfort because of large retail stores, fast food restaurants, and hotel chains? I wanted to get an expert's opinion on this topic, so I enlisted Natalie Rich. Hey guys, today I have Natalie Rich. She is a writer, blogger, digital manager, travel nomad, and influencer on all things travel related. She quit her cozy 9-to-5 office job to travel the world. With over 20 countries, 70 cities, and 3 continents, you could say she knows a thing or two about international travel. Please welcome Natalie Rich. Thank you so much for joining me today on this conversation about international travel. I know you have done plenty of travel in the last few years. Have you done any travel recently? Can you talk about what's been going on in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. My latest trip was to Egypt, which was back in November of 2022. So pretty recent. It was an amazing time, and I'm already starting to look at other places that I want to travel to in the near future.
So you've been to Egypt after the pandemic. How has that changed? Like, have you seen any differences from your travels before the pandemic and now after the pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. There's been so many changes. It's like night and day. Specifically with the group that I travel with, the requirements to travel has changed. So while we're kind of nearing the end of the pandemic and restrictions are starting to loosen up, still some countries are very, very firm with making sure that you have a negative COVID test, making sure you're vaccinated. So that being thrown into the mix of everything else you need to do to prepare for travel, such as, updating your passport, packing, figuring out your itinerary, that just is a whole nother level of requirements that you need. And it is kind of a battle sometimes, especially if for some reason you happen to get a negative COVID test right before your trip. So it's been a challenge, but thankfully, if you do follow the requirements required for each country, you're good to go. And that's another thing, is every country is different. So in order to figure out what's needed, you have to do your research, because you might not be let in if you haven't followed the proper requirements for entry. So definitely another hoop that you have to jump through when it comes to international travel. But as someone who is obsessed with it, of course, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that I'm able to travel easily and with following the rules.
Do you think big corporations like the fast food chains, the hotel chains, the box stores has anything to do with Americans staying local compared to going internationally?
Absolutely. I think as humans, we're all creatures of habit, and rarely do we, steer away from a restaurant or a store that we know and love for something else. Especially if you're in a new country with food that you're not quite used to and spices that you're not quite used to. I could see how some people would just prefer, hey, there's a McDonald's down the street for me. I'd much rather have that. But the funny thing about other countries is most of those, branded retail restaurants or stores, they are in their country. You don't have the means and you have the passion, you can make it happen for yourself. And I wouldn't let anything such as fears of flying, fears of financials, fear of, not knowing people when you get there hold you back from seeing the world. And for me, I love helping people plan their trips. So if there is someone who watches this, who is interested in kind of learning where to start, I can absolutely help with that.
Thank you so much, Natalie. If you want to follow Natalie on Instagram, it's at Rich with Adventures. Also, you could check out her website for any trips on traveling at richwithadventures.com. So after speaking to Natalie, I did some more research on where the top travel location for Americans, and the number one spot is Mexico, Americans' favorite holiday destination. There's just so many things about Mexico. The sun, the people, the diversity, the food, the great weather. There's so many reasons to flock to Mexico, and the numbers show that there's no signs of stopping. According to some of the latest statistics, the first quarter of 2022, internationals arrived to Mexico almost reached pre-pandemic levels. And all of the travelers who visited Mexico so far, 77% of these tourists came from, you guessed it, the United States. Despite even the travel warnings and some negative headlines, travelers, like Americans, can't get enough of Mexico. So what exactly makes Mexico everyone's favorite holiday destination? I'll break it down for you. Talking about traveling to Mexico, it's impossible not to mention its diversity. In a short flight within the country, you can be transported from the luscious beaches to the desert paradise. Also, not to mention the cities. The ever so cultural capital, Mexico City, keeps travelers coming back for even more. Seriously, a few days isn't enough. Next time when you think about putting in your vacation leave, let's think about outside of the box and outside of our comfort zone. Let's go ahead and grab our passport and pick one of these wonderful destinations around the world. We could go snorkeling in Australia, taste some food in South Africa, explore Europe, and even Asia. There is so much to see and do in this world, and it all begins with you.